Page 3 now, Supreme Court decisions, two major rulings. In one, the Supreme Court threw out the conviction of a Pennsylvania man who made threats on Facebook.
They say that your First Amendment right to free speech ends when you yell fire in a crowded movie theater. I would assume that if you threaten another person's life, and he also threatened to go into a nearby elementary school and shoot up a kindergarten class, that would make some people wary that this person might, in fact, take this type of action.
In the other ruling, the court sided with a Muslim woman who did not get hired by Abercrombie & Fitch because of her headscarf.
So I think what's going to be really interesting not only is how employers try and react to this, but also on future potential discrimination cases, whether or not this opens the door to a significant increase in lawsuits. We've already seen through the Equal Employment Commission an uptick in discrimination lawsuits based on religion over the last couple of years by about 1,000 cases.
Now, federal law forbids employers from firing or not hiring people based on religion. The law is pretty clear, or is it? Joining me now, attorney and legal analyst Mychal Wilson. Mychal, let's start with the headscarf ruling, if you will. One of the justices, I think it was Scalia, said, hey, this is an easy one, an easy ruling, because it's freedom of religion. You agree with that?
Yeah, and obviously it was. It's an 8-1 decision by the court. You know, I think where the court is headed with this, if you've seen in recent years, any rulings, any actually cases involving freedom of religion, the court's going to rule in favor of that. What was surprisingly is that they've also favored big businesses, as we saw in the Hobby Lobby. But here, they made a point saying, hey, listen, neutrality is not enough. You need to make accommodations for these people who have different religious views.
So from a business perspective, is it that Abercrombie & Fitch blew it here by even admitting that there was some sort of religious connotation here? So if you see something, just don't say it and not hire that person? I mean, let's face it. You got to look at ways around this if you're a business person, right?
Right, and pretty much they did. You know, you have to look back. When this case was initially filed, it was 2008. So back then, Abercrombie & Fitch had a special look, right, which was essentially young white males who were models. You know, they received a lot of criticism for that.
Yeah, well, I could never work there, that's for sure.
Neither could I.
Facebook ruling. The interesting thing about this is that it was, as far as I saw, not really based on the First Amendment. It was based on something else. I don't know exactly what, but I found that fascinating.
Yeah, and what it does is, actually, if you look at it, it's focused on social media. And so what it does prevent is the criminalization of people now expressing their thoughts online. I mean, because the issue is you have parents who are like, oh no, my high school son or my teenage son made these comments, now they may get prosecuted, versus people who are survivors of domestic violence who want the stricter limits here.
But what about the people who go online and threaten the President of the United States and talk about specific kinds of threats? I know that people have been prosecuted regarding that. Do you think that this is going to give the crazy people of the world some sort of carte blanche to make threats about you or me or whoever, the President of the United States?
Well, what the court did is they threw this case back down to the lower court and said, you have to decide, first of all, you can't base it on the reasonable belief. You have to look at either two things, essentially the recklessness of the statement or the intent and the perception of the person making the statement. So, I think if you apply this to, say, a movie theater, or if someone made these statements on an airplane, yeah, I mean, they would definitely be convicted, prosecuted and convicted, no question.
But wouldn't you look at that as a contract? The old example of you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's something a little bit different from the way I have been told, and that is a contract. When you buy that ticket, you're under a contract with the movie theater not to do that. You buy that airline ticket, you're under a contract. Would you look at it that way?
To a certain extent, but even when you sign up for Facebook or whatever social media site it is, there's also a disclaimer. There's also a contract there as well.
That's true.
So you have to comply with those laws and regulations.
Okay, Dennis Hastert, shifting gears completely here now. The charges, I've read the indictment, the charges seem odd to me. Do you get the feeling that they were going after him one way or another, maybe based on these prior indiscretions?
Yes, and the one thing about Hastert is, and it's all very anecdotal, is he has a history of alleged, I want to say, inducements or corruption or potential bribes. And, you know, this started with the Turkey matter. An official at the Turkey consulate claimed that Hastert received $500,000 to basically pull the Armenian genocide resolution. He was also affiliated, you know, he was the chief deputy whip of the House at one point. So he was used to making sure everyone was in alignment and, you know, providing incentives for his party constituents.
Everybody's asking how he is able to pay a $3.5 million piece of blackmail. You know, when he came into Congress, I've been told he was worth about $200,000. It kind of raises an eyebrow. But what about the statute of limitations, both criminally and civilly?
Right, and Graham, let me just address the first matter.
All right.
He was a politician, let's remember that. So you could apply the same with Hillary and Bill Clinton, too.
Yep. Oh,
they went to
true.
the White House broke, and they came out worth millions of dollars. The statute of limitations have a long past, criminally and civilly. Criminally, at the time, it would have been about 2 or 3 years for the alleged victim. Had the person been, say, 16, they could have, you know, they had until 19. Illinois did extend the statute of limitations on the criminal side for 20 years, but there's no retroactivity.
Right.
So that has long expired. So is a civil matter. Now, the interesting thing is if the victim, as we know, individual A, had a lawsuit that expired, and the lawsuit is no longer valid, then that person could be at risk for blackmail. Which is, you know, the threat of revealing information for payment. And more importantly here is that if you look at the indictment, the FBI, the government's not going after him for past misconduct. They say, quote, past misconduct.
Right.
And they also use the language individual A. So it seems that individual A, whoever the victim is working with the FBI. And there seems to be something more at play here. There's something more complex. Is there a history of abuse with regarding Hastert? Meaning, you know, is it like a Sandusky Penn State matter? Is it like a Josh Dugar matter? You know, TLC. So, you know, is Hastert going to get his own TLC show now?
And I wonder if they're going to go after individual A for blackmail. I mean, that is against the law, is it not?
Well, and that's the point here. You know, it's not against the law for Hastert to offer hush money, because he could have simply, what he could have done is just offered a confidential settlement agreement
Right.
with the disclaimer like there's no admission of wrongdoing.
Right.
And so, yeah, there is a question of blackmail, which leads me to believe there's something greater at play here.
I agree.
It's not just this one sex abuse charge.
Yeah, and I think these federal banking laws are unconstitutional. I don't think the government has any business in what you're depositing or I'm withdrawing. Mychal,
But Graham, you know what?
Hurry up.
You know who have to thank for that is Hastert. He's the one who shepherded the Patriot Act bill that expanded those banking regulations, which ultimately brings him down. But also,
Right.
it was used to prosecute and go after former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer.
Okay, but these were put on the books in the 1970s. So I mean, either way,
Right, but they were
I think
amended
they're all
by
wrong.
but they were amended by the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act, if you're going to go back to it, you have to go back to GOP, the Bush administration.
You know how I feel about the Patriot Act. I'm not a fan of it. Mychal, thank you.
Thank you, Graham.